She wants to play us for food, as if this is some sort of medieval tavern where peasants gamble for scraps. The mocking laughter echoed through the elite chess club as the wealthy members stared at the 12-year-old homeless girl in her threadbare jacket. What would drive a hungry child to walk into a room full of millionaires and challenge them to a chess match? And why did her small, trembling hands move the pieces with such devastating precision that even former champions would soon fall silent? When Maya Thompson pushed open those heavy doors on that freezing December night, she carried nothing but a cardboard sign and a secret that would shatter every assumption in that room. The members thought they were about to teach a desperate street child a lesson in humility. They had no idea they were about to face someone who would transform their prestigious club and their hearts forever. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me to give you better stories in next videos. If you are watching my story for the first time, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The bitter December wind cut through Maya Thompson's threadbare jacket as she huddled in the doorway of a closed bakery on Madison Avenue. At 12 years old, she had already mastered the art of survival on the unforgiving streets of the city. Her dark skin, once glowing with youth, now bore the weathered look of someone who had seen too much too soon. Her kinky hair, which she tried to keep neat despite having no proper tools, was hidden beneath a worn baseball cap she'd found 2 weeks ago. Maya's stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning when a kind woman had given her half a sandwich outside the subway station. She pressed her small hands against her belly, trying to quiet the hunger pangs that had become her constant companion. The cardboard sign beside her read simply, "Hungry. Any help appreciated. God bless." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the affluent neighborhood, Maya's mind drifted to memories that both comforted and tormented her. She could still hear her grandmother's gentle voice, teaching her the names of chess pieces in the homeless shelter where they'd lived together for 3 years. "The queen is the most powerful piece, baby girl," Grandma Rose would say, her weathered hands guiding Maya's small fingers across the battered chessboard they'd found in the shelter's recreation room. "Just like you're going to be powerful someday, you remember that. That was 2 years ago, before the cancer took Grandma Rose away, leaving Maya completely alone in a world that seemed determined to forget she existed. The shelter had tried to keep her, but overcrowding and bureaucratic red tape had pushed her back onto the streets. Child services had lost track of her after she'd run from the 3rd foster home that treated her more like unpaid help than a child needing care. But Grandma Rose had left her with something more valuable than money or possessions. She'd left her with the gift of chess. In those long hours at the shelter, while other kids watched television or played video games, Grandma Rose had taught Maya the intricacies of the Sicilian defense, the elegance of the Queen's gambit, and the ruthless efficiency of the 4 knights game. Maya's young mind had absorbed it all like a sponge, finding in the 64 squares a world where logic reigned and a small black pawn could become a powerful queen. After her grandmother's death, Maya had continued to study chess in the only way available to her. She would sneak into public libraries during the day, devouring chess books and watching online tutorials on the computers until librarians inevitably asked her to leave. She played against herself, using a tiny magnetic chess set she'd found in a dumpster behind a toy store, working through famous games and creating new strategies in her mind during the long, cold nights. As she sat in that doorway, Maya's keen eyes noticed something interesting across the street. Through the large windows of an elegant brownstone building, she could see warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, well-dressed people moved about, and she could make out what appeared to be chessboards set up on multiple tables. Her heart skipped a beat. She had discovered the Grandview Elite Chess Club, though she didn't know its name yet. For the next hour, Maya watched transfixed as the people inside played chess. Even from her distance, she could see they were serious players. Their movements were deliberate, their postures focused. They wore expensive suits and elegant dresses, jewelry glinting under the chandeliers. These were people who had never wondered where their next meal would come from, who had never slept on cardboard or washed in public restrooms. As she observed them, Maya noticed something else. They weren't particularly good players. Oh, they knew the rules, certainly, and they played with the confidence that came from years of casual practice. But she could see mistakes even from across the street. One man in a navy suit moved his bishop, leaving his king exposed to a potential check. A woman in pearls pushed a pawn forward when she should have developed her knight. These were the kinds of errors Grandma Rose would have gently corrected with a knowing smile. An idea began to form in Maya's hungry, desperate mind. It was bold, perhaps foolish, but hunger had a way of making one brave. She had something these wealthy people valued, skill at their beloved game. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could trade that skill for something she desperately needed. Food. Maya stood up slowly, her joints stiff from sitting in the cold for so long. She brushed off her jacket as best she could, straightened her cap, and picked up her cardboard sign, folding it carefully and tucking it into her jacket. She had learned that appearance mattered to people like those in the club. The cleaner she could make herself look, the better chance she had of at least getting through the door. As she crossed the street, Maya's mind was already working through opening gambits and defensive strategies. She thought of Grandma Rose's words. Chess is life, baby girl. Every move matters, but sometimes you gotta sacrifice a piece to win the game. Tonight, Maya was ready to make her move. Tonight, she would walk into that warm, glowing world of privilege and possibility, and she would offer them something they couldn't refuse, a chance to play against a true prodigy, even if they didn't know it yet. The brass handle of the club's door was cold under her small hand as she pushed it open, stepping from the harsh winter night into a world of warmth, wealth, and walnut chessboards. The smell of leather and expensive cologne hit her immediately, so different from the exhaust fumes and garbage she was used to. Her stomach clenched, not just from hunger now, but from the audacity of what she was about to do. But Grandma Rose had taught her well. In chess, as in life, fortune favors the bold. The warmth hit Maya's face like a gentle slap as she stepped into the Grandview Elite Chess Club. The contrast between the bitter cold outside and the perfectly climate-controlled interior made her shiver involuntarily. For a moment she stood frozen in the entryway, taking in the opulence that surrounded her. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, oil paintings in golden frames adorned the walls, and crystal chandeliers cast warm light over dozens of chess tables, each set with pieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The club's interior was even more magnificent than what she had glimpsed through the windows. The main room stretched out before her, with high ceilings decorated with intricate crown molding. Members sat at various tables, some engaged in intense games while others stood nearby, observing with glasses of what appeared to be expensive whiskey or wine in their hands. The soft murmur of refined conversation filled the air, punctuated occasionally by the distinctive sound of chess pieces being placed on boards. Maya had barely taken 3 steps inside when a security guard materialized beside her. He was a large man in a black uniform, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to barely concealed disgust as he took in her appearance. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "This is a private club. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." The conversations nearest to them began to die down as members noticed the intrusion. Maya saw heads turning, faces registering shock, dismay, and in some cases, outright revulsion. She recognized these expressions. She'd seen them countless times when she'd wandered too close to the nice parts of town. But this time she didn't lower her head and shuffle away. This time she had a purpose. Please, sir, Maya said, her voice clear despite her nervousness. I just want to play chess. I can play for food. If I lose, I'll leave right away, I promise. The security guard's hand moved to her shoulder, ready to escort her out, when a commanding voice cut through the growing tension. What is the meaning of this, Roberts? Richard Whitmore emerged from a group of players, his silver hair perfectly styled, his charcoal gray suit impeccable. As the president of the Grandview Elite Chess Club, he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His blue eyes, cold as winter ice, fixed on Maya with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. Mr. Whitmore, sir, the security guard stammered. This child just walked in off the street. I was just removing her. From off the street? Margaret Sinclair had joined them, her voice dripping with disdain. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month, her gray hair styled in an elaborate updo held in place with diamond pins. Richard, really, what has happened to our security? We can't have vagrants simply wandering in here. By now, most of the club had noticed the commotion. Theodore Banks abandoned his game to investigate, his heavy footsteps announcing his approach. Charles Hoffman and Victoria Pemberton followed, forming a semi-circle around Maya, who suddenly felt very small and very alone. I'm not a vagrant, Maya said, finding her courage. I know how to play chess. I learned from my grandmother. I thought maybe someone would play me for food. If I win, you give me something to eat. If I lose, I'll do whatever work you want. Clean the floors, wash dishes, anything. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Then, almost simultaneously, several of the members burst into laughter. It wasn't kind laughter. It was the sort of cruel, mocking sound that Maya had heard too often in her short life. Did you hear that? Victoria Pemberton gasped between laughs, her perfectly manicured hand pressed to her chest. She wants to play us for food, as if this is some sort of medieval tavern where peasants gamble for scraps. This is absolutely preposterous, Charles Hoffman added, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Richard, surely you're not going to entertain this absurd request. The child is clearly disturbed. We should call the authorities. Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she stood her ground. I'm not disturbed, sir. I'm hungry, and I'm good at chess. Really good. This prompted another round of laughter. Ted Banks, his considerable belly shaking with mirth, wiped tears from his eyes. Oh, this is rich. The little street child thinks she can play chess. Tell me, girl, do you even know how the pieces move? I know the Nimzo Indian defense, Maya said quietly. I know the Caro-Can, the French defense, and the King's Indian. I know that you, sir, she looked directly at Ted Banks, just lost your game over there because you moved your queen too early and left your king's side exposed. The laughter stopped abruptly. Ted Banks' face turned red as he glanced back at his abandoned game, where indeed his opponent had just captured his queen and was moving in for checkmate. Richard Whitmore studied Maya with renewed interest, though his expression remained skeptical. You've been watching us play? From outside, yes, sir. It's warm in here, and the lights are bright. I could see the boards through the windows. This is ridiculous, Margaret interjected. Richard, we cannot set a precedent of allowing every homeless child who claims to play chess to wander in here. What would the other members think? What would happen to our reputation? Our reputation, Richard said slowly, a slight smile playing at his lips, is that we are the finest chess club in the city. Surely our reputation can withstand one small child's delusions of grandeur. He turned to Maya. What's your name, girl? Maya Thompson, sir. Well, Miss Thompson, you've made quite a bold claim. Ted, since she's already critiqued your game, perhaps you'd like to put her to the test. One quick game. When you win, which should take all of 5 minutes, she leaves and never comes back. Ted Banks puffed up his chest, his earlier embarrassment transforming into indignation. "It would be my pleasure to teach this presumptuous child a lesson in humility." "And if I win?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The room erupted in laughter again. "If you win," Victoria scoffed. "Dear child, Ted Banks has been playing chess for 40 years. He's won numerous club championships." "If you win," Richard said, his tone suggesting he found the very idea amusing, "we'll give you a meal from our kitchen." "A full meal, not scraps. But when you lose, and you will lose, you'll clean every bathroom in this building before you leave. Do we have an agreement?" Maya nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. We have an agreement." As Ted Banks led the way to a chess table near the center of the room, Maya heard the whispers following in their wake. "This is unconscionable," someone muttered. "Allowing such filth in here," another voice added. "She probably doesn't even know how to set up the board properly." But Maya didn't let their words affect her. She had faced worse than wealthy people's scorn. As she sat down at the beautiful chess table, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the expensive pieces, she thought of Grandma Rose. "Sometimes, baby girl," her grandmother had said, "you gotta let them underestimate you. That's when you show them what you're really made of." The entire club had gathered around now, forming a circle of expensive suits and designer dresses around the table, where a homeless 12-year-old girl sat across from a successful investment banker. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Ted Banks in his three-piece suit, gold watch glinting on his wrist, versus Maya in her dirty jacket and worn sneakers, her dark skin still bearing traces of street grime she couldn't wash away. "Ladies first," Ted said mockingly, gesturing for Maya to make the opening move, though I use the term lady loosely in this case. More chuckles from the crowd. Maya didn't respond. Instead, she reached out with steady hands and moved her king's pawn forward 2 squares. The game had begun, and with it, a chain of events that would change not just Maya's life, but the lives of everyone in that room. They just didn't know it yet. As Maya's fingers left her pawn, positioned perfectly at E4, the crowd around the table pressed closer. The smell of expensive perfume and cologne was overwhelming, mixing with the lingering aroma of cigars from the smoking room. She tried not to show how the proximity of so many hostile bodies made her uncomfortable, keeping her eyes fixed on the board. Ted Banks leaned back in his leather chair, making a show of examining his fingernails before lazily reaching out to move his pawn to E5. "The king's pawn opening," he announced to the crowd, his voice dripping with condescension. "How terribly predictable. I suppose they teach that in— Where exactly did you learn chess, child? In some shelter's recreation room?" The comment hit closer to home than Maya cared to admit, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she developed her knight to F3, a classic response that drew snickers from several observers. "Oh, look at that," Margaret Sinclair cooed mockingly. "She knows how the horsey moves. How adorable." "Richard, are we really going to waste our entire evening watching Ted destroy this poor creature? I have a charity board meeting at 8. "A charity board meeting," Victoria Pemberton laughed, touching Margaret's arm. "How ironic, darling. Perhaps you should bring the girl with you. She'd make an excellent cautionary tale about what happens when we don't properly fund education programs." "Or birth control programs," someone muttered from the back, earning a few cruel chuckles. Maya's jaw tightened, but her hands remained steady as Ted moved his knight to C6. She could see he was playing carelessly, not taking her seriously at all. Good. She pushed her pawn to D4, her movements becoming more confident. "Look at her trying so hard," Charles Hoffman observed, adjusting his glasses to peer at the board. "It's almost endearing, like watching a child play dress-up in their parents' clothes." "Except, of course, this child has no parents, does she?" "Charles?" Eleanor Whitmore admonished softly, though Maya noticed she didn't defend her, merely objected to the directness of the insult. Ted Banks captured Maya's pawn with his E5 pawn, grinning broadly. "There goes your center control, little girl. This is what happens when you play with the grown-ups. We don't give participation trophies here." Maya recaptured with her knight, maintaining her composure even as the insults continued to rain down. She had learned long ago that showing hurt only encouraged tormentors. The street had taught her that lesson well. "I must say," Richard Whitmore commented, circling the table slowly, "this is rather entertaining in a grotesque sort of way, like watching a car accident in slow motion. You can see the disaster coming, but you can't look away." "The smell is what I can't get past," Victoria stage whispered to Margaret, though loud enough for everyone to hear. "When was the last time this child had a proper bath? We'll need to sanitize that chair after she leaves." "And the chess pieces," Margaret added. "God knows what diseases she might be carrying. Street children are notorious vectors for all sorts of infections." Ted Banks moved his bishop to B4, pinning Maya's knight. "Check," he announced triumphantly, though Maya could see it was a premature attack. "What will you do now, Run away like you probably run from the police? Or will you stand and face the consequences of your arrogance?" Maya calmly moved her bishop to D2, blocking the check and developing her piece simultaneously. The move was sophisticated enough that a few of the observers exchanged glances, though they quickly returned to their mockery. "She must have seen that move somewhere," Charles rationalized. "These street children, they're very good at mimicry. It's how they survive, copying what they see others do, like monkeys." "Monkeys might be cleaner," someone quipped, earning another round of laughter. Ted Banks, his face reddening slightly at Maya's defensive move, castled queenside. "You know," he said, leaning forward, "I'm doing you a favor here, girl. This lesson in humility might be the most valuable thing you ever learn. The world doesn't owe you anything just because you're poor and pathetic." "Ted's absolutely right," Richard agreed, swirling his whiskey. "Too many of these children grow up thinking society should provide for them. A little harsh reality is good for building character." Maya developed her other knight to D2, her position growing stronger with each move. She could see Ted wasn't paying attention to the accumulating threats, too busy grandstanding for his audience. "You know what the saddest part is?" Victoria mused, examining her diamond bracelet. "She probably actually believes she has a chance. It's that false hope that keeps these people from accepting their proper place in society." "Their proper place being anywhere but here," Margaret added firmly. "Richard, after this farce is over, we really need to discuss improving our security protocols. If a child can wander in off the streets, what's stopping actual criminals from entering?" "She might be an actual criminal," Charles suggested. "These street children often work for adult thieves. She could be casing the place right now, memorizing where we keep valuable items." Maya wanted to scream at them that she wasn't a thief, that she had never stolen anything in her life despite having every reason to. But she knew it wouldn't matter. To them she wasn't a person. She was a problem, an inconvenience, a source of amusement. So she did what Grandma Rose had taught her. She let her chess speak for her. She pushed her queen's pawn to C4, expanding on the queen side and preparing to launch an attack on Ted's exposed king. The move was subtle but powerful, the kind of strategic planning that separated casual players from serious ones. Ted Banks, still not recognizing the danger, moved his knight to F6. "Getting desperate, are we?" he taunted. "Moving pawns around randomly won't save you, child. Chess requires intelligence, education, breeding, things you clearly lack." "Speaking of breeding," Victoria said with false concern, "does anyone know if she's been vaccinated? We should probably call animal control, child services, after this." The crowd laughed again, but Maya noticed something different this time. A few of the observers were looking at the board more carefully now, beginning to see the storm that was building. Harrison Vale, who had been watching silently from the back, pushed forward slightly, his experienced eyes reading the position with growing interest. "Tell me, girl," Ted continued, oblivious to his deteriorating position, "what did you think would happen here tonight? That we'd be impressed by your sob story? That we'd adopt you like some stray puppy?" "Ted," Harrison said quietly, "you might want to pay attention to your king's position." "Nonsense, Harrison," Ted waved dismissively. "I have everything under control. This will be over in 5 more moves maximum." Maya moved her rook to C1, the piece sliding into place with devastating purpose. She looked up at Ted Banks for the first time since the game began, her dark eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that made him unconsciously lean back. "Your move, sir," she said softly. The mockery in the room began to quiet slightly as more experienced players recognized what was happening on the board. Ted Banks's king was walking into a trap, and the homeless girl with dirty clothes and an empty stomach was the one setting it. But Ted himself remained blissfully unaware, moving his bishop to a 7 with a flourish. "You see," he announced to the crowd, "she's already running out of moves. The difference between someone who truly understands chess and someone who just knows how the pieces move is becoming apparent." Richard Whitmore, however, was frowning now, his eyes scanning the board more carefully. 4 moves, he calculated. If the girl saw it, and that was still a big if in his mind, Ted would be mated in 4 moves. Maya's hand hovered over her queen. The room held its breath, though most didn't know why. She lifted the piece carefully, as if it were made of spun glass rather than carved wood, and placed it on a 4. "Check," she said quietly. Ted Banks's laughter died in his throat. He stared at the board, seeing for the first time the coordinated attack that had been building while he'd been busy humiliating a child. His king had nowhere safe to run. "It's just a check," he said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Checks don't win games." But as he studied the board, his face growing paler by the second, he began to see what Harrison Vale and Richard Whitmore had already recognized. This wasn't just a check. This was the beginning of the end. The room had gone completely silent now, the earlier mockery replaced by stunned disbelief. The homeless girl they'd been laughing at, the child they'd compared to a monkey, the diseased street urchin they couldn't wait to throw out. She was winning. And not just winning, but winning brilliantly, with a combination that would have been impressive coming from anyone, let alone a 12-year-old girl who'd learned chess in a homeless shelter. Ted Banks' hand trembled slightly as it hovered over his king. The checking queen commanded the board like an avenging angel, and every possible escape square was either occupied by his own pieces or controlled by Maya's perfectly coordinated army. He moved his king to B8, the only legal move available, and the sweat on his forehead caught the light from the chandelier above. Maya didn't hesitate. Her rook slid to C8, delivering another check that sent murmurs rippling through the crowd. The sophisticated observers were beginning to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary, while others still clung to their disbelief. "This is impossible," Margaret whispered, though her voice carried in the now hushed room. "She must be cheating somehow." "How could she possibly cheat?" Harrison Vale responded, his eyes never leaving the board. "We're all watching every move." Ted's king retreated to B7, and Maya's rook pursued relentlessly to C7, checking again. The king fled to B8, and when Maya's queen swooped to a 7, the final check was delivered. Ted Banks stared at the board for a full 30 seconds, his mind searching desperately for an escape that didn't exist. "Checkmate," Maya said softly, her voice carrying no triumph, no gloating, just a simple statement of fact. The silence that followed was absolute. Someone's whiskey glass clinked against a ring, the sound sharp as breaking crystal in the quiet room. Ted Banks' face had turned from red to white to an alarming shade of purple. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. That's not possible," he finally managed. You must have... You had to have... Had to have what, Ted? Harrison Vale stepped forward, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. She beat you fair and square, 15 moves, a perfect attacking sequence that you walked right into. But she's a street child, Victoria Pemberton protested, her voice shrill with disbelief. Street children don't play chess like that. Richard Whitmore moved closer to the board, studying the final position with the eye of someone who'd played for 50 years. The girl's technique wasn't just good, it was exceptional. The way she'd built her attack while Ted was distracted by his own ego showed a level of strategic thinking that most adult players never achieved. Where did you really learn to play? Richard asked, his tone different now, less dismissive, more curious. I told you, Maya replied, meeting his gaze steadily. My grandmother taught me. She learned from her father, who learned from his father. Chess has been in my family for generations. Your family? Charles Hoffman scoffed, trying to reclaim some of the room's earlier superiority. And what family would that be? The family that left you on the streets? Maya's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained level. My grandmother died of cancer 2 years ago. My parents died when I was 3. Car accident. There's no one else. A convenient story, Margaret said, though her voice lacked its earlier venom. Anyone can claim a tragic past. I don't need your pity, Maya said firmly. I won the game. That was the deal, a full meal from your kitchen. Ted Banks suddenly slammed his fist on the table, making the pieces jump. Several pawns toppled over, and his king fell with a hollow wooden sound that echoed through the room. This is preposterous. I demand a rematch. She got lucky, that's all. Beginner's luck. Beginner's luck? Harrison laughed, a dry sound. Ted, she played the Alekhine defense into a queenside castle attack. She calculated at least 5 moves ahead for that mating sequence. That's not luck, that's mastery. Then she must have had help. Ted stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Someone must have coached her, fed her moves somehow. Who, Ted? Richard asked with raised eyebrows. The pigeons outside? The ghost of Bobby Fischer? Accept it. You've been beaten by a 12-year-old girl. The humiliation in Ted Banks' face was complete. He looked around the room, seeking support, but found only expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. Even his usual allies seemed to be distancing themselves from him. This is insane, he muttered, grabbing his coat from a nearby rack. Absolutely insane. I'm not staying here to be humiliated by some nobody. He stormed toward the exit, but Maya's voice stopped him. Mr. Banks? He turned, his face twisted with rage and embarrassment. Thank you for the game, she said simply. You played well. Your Scotch game opening was sound. You just got too aggressive with your bishop. The sincerity in her voice, the complete lack of mockery or superiority, seemed to deflate him entirely. Without another word, he pushed through the door and disappeared into the night. Well, Richard Whitmore said after a moment, that was unexpected. He gestured to one of the staff members hovering nervously at the edge of the crowd. Have the kitchen prepare a meal for Miss Thompson. The full dinner service, not leftovers. Richard, Margaret protested. You can't be serious. We don't even know who this child really is. She could be anybody. She's someone who just played one of the most beautiful attacking games I've seen in years, Harrison Vale interjected. I'd like to play her myself, if she's willing. The crowd stirred with renewed interest. Harrison Vale was a different caliber of player entirely, a former state champion who'd competed nationally in his younger days. If the girl had gotten lucky against Ted, Harrison would expose her. Maya's stomach growled audibly, reminding everyone why she was there in the first place. I'll play anyone, she said, but could I eat first? I haven't had anything since yesterday morning. The casual admission of her hunger seemed to make some of the crowd uncomfortable. Eleanor Whitmore stepped forward. Of course you should eat first, dear. Richard, have them set a proper table for her. She can eat in the kitchen with the staff, Margaret suggested quickly. We needn't make a spectacle of this. No, Richard said firmly, surprising everyone, including himself. She won her meal fairly. She'll eat in the dining room like any other victor. As Maya was led toward the dining room, she heard the conversations exploding behind her. Arguments, debates, accusations, and wonder all mixing together in a chaos of privileged voices trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Charles Hoffman was insisting it had to be some kind of trick or scam. Victoria Pemberton was already on her phone, trying to look up if there were any news stories about chess-playing homeless children. Margaret was demanding that Richard reconsider, warning about the precedent this would set. But Harrison Vale stood quietly by the abandoned chessboard, resetting the pieces and playing through Maya's attacking sequence again. Each move revealed new layers of sophistication, subtle positional advantages that accumulated into an overwhelming attack. This was no fluke, no lucky accident. In the dining room, Maya sat at a table with a white tablecloth, real silver cutlery, and a crystal glass filled with water. When the plate arrived, roasted chicken with vegetables and potatoes, still steaming, she had to blink back tears. It was more food than she usually saw in a week. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that staff members were peering at her from doorways. She used the utensils correctly, another skill Grandma Rose had insisted on teaching her. Just because we're poor doesn't mean we're ignorant, her grandmother had said. You carry yourself with dignity, always. Through the dining room's glass doors, she could see the members still arguing in the main hall. Some were leaving in disgust, while others seemed energized by the evening's unexpected turn. She noticed Harrison Vale had acquired a notebook and was analyzing the game, occasionally shaking his head in apparent admiration. "Excuse me, miss?" A young waiter appeared at her elbow. "Mister. Vale asks if you'd be willing to play another game when you're finished eating. He says—" The waiter paused, seemingly embarrassed. "He says he'll make it worth your while." Maya took another bite of chicken, chewing thoughtfully. She could see the trap here. They wanted to prove that Ted's loss was a fluke. But she could also see opportunity. These people had money, resources, connections. If she played this right, she might secure more than just one meal. "Tell Mr. Vale I'll play him," she said finally, "but I want to set new terms." The waiter blinked in surprise. "New terms? If I win, I want a week's worth of meals, new clothes, and a place to sleep for 3 nights. If I lose, I'll clean this entire building, top to bottom, and never come back." The waiter's eyes widened. I'll relay your message." As he scurried away, Maya returned to her meal. Through the window she could see it had started snowing, large white flakes drifting past the warm lights of the club. Somewhere out there, other homeless kids were huddling in doorways and under bridges, trying to survive another bitter night. But here, in this moment, she was warm and fed, and she had something more valuable than money. She had leverage. These people had laughed at her, mocked her, treated her as less than human. Now she would show them what Grandma Rose had always known, that brilliance could come from anywhere, even from a 12-year-old girl with nothing but the clothes on her back and 64 squares of infinite possibility. Harrison Vale stood at the entrance to the dining room, studying Maya as she finished her meal. Unlike the others, he didn't see a homeless child who'd gotten lucky. He saw a player, someone who understood the game at a fundamental level that couldn't be taught, only refined. The way she'd dismantled Ted Banks showed not just tactical skill but psychological insight. She'd let Ted's ego be his downfall, never once rising to his bait, never showing her hand until it was too late. "The girl wants to raise the stakes," Richard Whitmore said, appearing at Harrison's shoulder. "A week of meals, new clothes, 3 nights accommodation. Rather presumptuous, don't you think?" Harrison didn't take his eyes off Maya. "Is it?" She just humiliated one of our longest-standing members in 15 moves. I'd say she's earned the right to be presumptuous." "You can't be seriously considering this," Margaret Sinclair interjected, having followed Richard. "Harrison, you're a former state champion. Surely you're not going to dignify this charade by participating." "It's not a charade," Harrison replied calmly. "That girl plays real chess. Beautiful chess. I haven't seen an attack that clean since I played against Kamsky in '98. Charles Hoffman pushed his way into the conversation, his face flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous. We're acting like she's some kind of prodigy when clearly she just memorized a few tricks. Street performers do this all the time. They learn one impressive routine and use it to fool gullible marks." "Then I'll expose her," Harrison said simply. "If she's a fraud, one game against me will prove it. But if she's not—" He trailed off, the implications hanging in the air. Victoria Pemberton, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since Ted's defeat, spoke up. "What if this is all part of some elaborate con? What if there are others waiting outside? We could be robbed or worse. Robbed by a 12-year-old girl who weighs maybe 70 pounds soaking wet?" Eleanor Whitmore asked, a note of sarcasm creeping into her usually gentle voice. "Really, Victoria, listen to yourself." Maya finished her last bite and carefully placed her utensils on the plate, crossing them properly as Grandma Rose had taught her. She wiped her mouth with the cloth napkin, folded it neatly, and stood up. Through the glass doors, she could see the members watching her, their expressions ranging from hostility to curiosity to something that might have been fear. She walked back into the main room with her head held high. The warmth from the fireplace felt good on her skin, and her stomach was wonderfully full for the first time in weeks. Whatever happened next, this evening had already been a victory. "Miss Thompson," Richard addressed her formally, though his tone carried an edge. "Mr. Vale has agreed to your terms, with one modification. If you lose, in addition to cleaning the building, you'll also submit to a full background check. We want to know exactly who you are and where you came from." Maya considered this. A background check would likely mean social services, foster care, the system she'd worked so hard to escape. But the potential reward, a week of safety and food, was worth the risk. "Agreed," she said. "This is a mistake," Charles muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Mark my words, we're being played for fools." Harrison Vale moved to the center chess table, the same one where Ted Banks had met his defeat. As he sat down, Maya noticed the difference in his demeanor compared to Ted. There was no casual arrogance, no dismissive attitude. Harrison was taking her seriously, which paradoxically made him far more dangerous. "Would you prefer white or black?" Harrison asked courteously. "You choose," Maya replied, taking her seat. Harrison smiled slightly. "Then I'll take white. Let's see what you can do with the black pieces, Miss Thompson." As they set up the board, more members drifted back into the room. Word had spread quickly through the club's various rooms, the card room, the library, the smoking lounge. Soon, nearly 40 people surrounded the table, creating a tight circle of expensive fabrics and judgmental eyes. Harrison opened with pawn to e4, the king's pawn, just as Maya had done against Ted. But his development was entirely different, precise, careful, probing for weaknesses while maintaining a solid structure. Maya responded with c5, the Sicilian defense, and she could hear murmurs of appreciation from some of the more knowledgeable observers. "The Sicilian," someone whispered. "Aggressive choice." For the next few moves, they danced through well-known opening theory. Harrison played the open Sicilian. Maya chose the Najdorf variation. Each move was met with increasing respect from Harrison and growing amazement from the crowd. "She knows theory," Victoria admitted reluctantly, "but knowing book moves isn't the same as understanding chess." As if hearing her, Maya deviated from the main line with a surprising bishop maneuver that made Harrison pause. He studied the position for a full minute before responding, and Maya could see she'd succeeded in taking him out of his preparation. "Interesting," Harrison murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Very interesting." The middle game developed into a complex positional battle. Unlike her game with Ted, where she'd been able to launch a quick attack, Harrison gave her no such opportunities. Every piece was defended, every advance met with a counter-threat. This was chess at a different level, and Maya had to dig deep into everything Grandma Rose had taught her. "Patience, baby girl," she could almost hear her grandmother's voice. "When you can't attack, you improve your position, make your pieces better, one move at a time." 20 moves in, the position was roughly equal, but Maya had a slight space advantage on the queen side. She began a slow expansion there, pushing pawns forward to cramp Harrison's pieces. "She's playing for an endgame," Richard observed, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "Most young players are all tactics and fireworks. She's playing like a veteran." "Lucky positioning," Charles insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "She'll crack under pressure." But Maya didn't crack. Move after move, she improved her position incrementally. She traded pieces when it benefited her, avoided trades when it didn't. She used her pawns to control key squares, her rooks to dominate files, her bishops to cut across the board like lasers. Harrison's forehead developed a thin sheen of perspiration. He was playing well, very well, but the girl kept finding resources, kept maintaining her slight edge. It was like playing against a computer. No clear mistakes to exploit, just relentless accurate chess. On move 35, Maya sacrificed a pawn for activity. It was a deep concept that even some of the stronger players in the crowd didn't immediately understand. She wasn't winning material, she was winning time and piece coordination. "My God," Eleanor Whitmore said softly. "She's brilliant." "Don't be ridiculous," Margaret snapped, but her protest sounded hollow. The evidence was right in front of them. A homeless child was not just competing with, but slowly outplaying a former state champion. Harrison saw the danger too late. Maya's pieces suddenly came alive, working in perfect harmony. Her rooks doubled on the 7th rank. Her bishops controlled long diagonals. Her knights occupied powerful outposts. Harrison's king, which had seemed safe, was suddenly under tremendous pressure. The attack that followed was not the brutal, quick strike she'd used against Ted. This was sophisticated, patient destruction. Each move tightened the noose a little more. Harrison defended resourcefully, finding moves that would have saved him against a lesser opponent, but Maya had seen further. On move 48, she played a quiet rook move that drew gasps from those who understood its implications. It was a move that simultaneously threatened 3 different winning continuations, and Harrison could only defend against 2. Harrison studied the position for 5 full minutes. His hand reached for his queen, pulled back, reached for a rook, pulled back again. Finally, with a slight smile and a shake of his head, he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He extended his hand across the board. "I resign," he said clearly. "Congratulations, Miss Thompson. That was one of the finest games I've played in years." The room exploded. Members who had been silent began talking all at once. Some accused Harrison of throwing the game, others demanded to analyze the position. Still others simply stood in stunned silence. Maya shook Harrison's hand, her small, dark fingers disappearing into his large, pale grip. "Thank you for the game, Mr. Vale. You played wonderfully. That defensive sequence from moves 38 to 42 was exceptional." Harrison's smile widened. "You saw all of it, didn't you? Every variation, every possible escape. How old are you really?" 12, sir. I'll be 13 in March." 12 years old, Harrison repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed tonight isn't luck or tricks or cons. This young woman is a genuine chess prodigy. I'd stake my reputation on it." Your reputation may not be worth much if you're losing to homeless children, Charles said nastily, but his comment fell flat. Too many people had seen the quality of the game, understood what had just happened. Richard Whitmore stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Well, Miss Thompson, it appears you've won your week of meals and accommodation. We are, if nothing else, people of our word. He paused, studying her with those cold blue eyes. But I have to ask, why didn't you mention you were this strong when you first came in? Why let the situation develop as it did? Maya met his gaze steadily. Would you have believed me if I'd walked in and claimed to be a chess prodigy? Or would you have thrown me out even faster? The truth of her words hung in the air, making several members shift uncomfortably. They all knew the answer. If she'd claimed to be a master player from the start, they would have laughed even harder, thrown her out even quicker. The murmuring crowd slowly began to disperse, some members heading to the bar to process what they'd witnessed, others gathering in small groups to debate whether they'd been victims of an elaborate hoax. But Harrison Vale remained at the table, resetting the pieces with methodical precision, his eyes never leaving Maya. You know, he said quietly, just loud enough for those still nearby to hear, I haven't lost a game in this club in 3 years. The last person to beat me here was an international master visiting from Russia. Maya helped him set up the pieces, her movements automatic after years of practice. You nearly had me at move 27. If you'd played bishop to a 3 instead of knight to d4, I would have been in serious trouble. Harrison's eyebrows rose. You saw that variation? I see everything, Maya said simply, without arrogance. It was just a statement of fact. Richard Whitmore hadn't moved from his position near the table. Something about this girl nagged at him, something beyond her obvious talent. Miss Thompson, he said suddenly, that technique you used in the endgame, the rook coordination on the 7th rank, where did you learn it? My grandmother called it the lawnmower, Maya replied, a small smile touching her lips at the memory. She said when 2 rooks work together on the 7th rank, they cut down everything in their path like a lawnmower cutting grass. Your grandmother, Margaret Sinclair said skeptically, having returned despite her earlier indignation. And what was your grandmother's name? Maya hesitated for just a moment. Rose Thompson. Rose Thompson, Harrison repeated thoughtfully. Wait, Rose Thompson, oh my God. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Richard, do you remember the story from the 1960s? The woman who was banned from competitive chess? Richard frowned. Vaguely, some scandal about a colored woman who wasn't allowed to compete in segregated tournaments? Not just any woman, Harrison said, his excitement growing. She was supposedly phenomenal. There were rumors she beat several masters in unofficial games, but the Chess Federation wouldn't recognize her results because... He trailed off, looking at Maya with new understanding. Because she was black, Maya finished quietly, and because she was a woman, and because she was poor. 3 strikes in 1962. The room had gone quiet again. Even Charles Hoffman seemed to be processing this information with something approaching humility. Your grandmother was Rose Thompson, Eleanor Whitmore said slowly. The Rose Thompson? The one they called the Shadow Queen. Maya nodded. She taught me everything. Said the gift ran in our family, from her father to her, from her to me. She used to say chess was the one place where the rules were the same for everyone, where a pawn could become a queen if it was brave enough to cross the board. This is all very touching, Victoria Pemberton interjected, though her voice had lost much of its earlier venom. But it doesn't change the fact that this child is homeless. Even if she is some sort of prodigy, what are we supposed to do about it? Before anyone could answer, James Chen walked through the main entrance. The internationally renowned Grandmaster was tonight's special guest, scheduled to give a simultaneous exhibition against 20 club members. He was a small, neat man in his 40s, with intense dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "James," Richard called out, relief evident in his voice. "Perfect timing. We have a rather unusual situation here." James Chen approached, his gaze immediately drawn to Maya. He studied her for a moment, then looked at the chessboard where the final position from her game with Harrison was still displayed. "Who played black?" he asked. "I did," Maya said. James studied the position more carefully, his trained eye reading the game's story in the placement of the pieces. "This is sophisticated chess, very sophisticated." He looked at Harrison. "You resigned here?" Harrison nodded. "She had me completely tied up, 3 different winning lines, and I could only stop 2. "May I?" James asked Maya, gesturing to the board. Maya nodded, and James sat down across from her. Without a word, he began setting up a new game. The crowd, which had been starting to disperse, quickly regrouped. James Chen was one of the strongest players in the country. If anyone could expose Maya as a fraud or lucky amateur, it would be him. "We'll play a rapid game," James announced. 15 minutes each. That should be enough to assess her true strength. "James," Richard said uncertainly, "she's just a child. And she's been playing all evening. Perhaps this isn't—" "It's fine," Maya interrupted. "I'll play." James smiled slightly. "You have the same quiet confidence I once saw in a young girl in China." She became women's world champion 5 years later. He gestured to the board. "You may have white." Maya opened with d4, the queen's pawn, showing she had a diverse repertoire. James responded with the king's Indian defense, a complex and aggressive system that led to sharp tactical games, perfect for testing someone's true abilities. What followed was chess at the highest level. Maya matched James move for move, idea for idea. When he set tactical traps, she saw through them. When he maneuvered for positional advantages, she countered with precision. The clock ticked down as they played at incredible speed, their hands moving in a blur. The crowd watched in absolute silence. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was art, war, poetry, and mathematics all rolled into one. Even those who didn't fully understand chess could feel the intensity of the mental battle being waged on the 64 squares. With 5 minutes left on each clock, James sacrificed a piece for a dangerous attack. It was the kind of bold, brilliant play that had made him famous. Maya thought for 30 seconds, an eternity in rapid chess, then found the only defense, a counter-sacrifice that led to a complex endgame. "Incredible," someone whispered. The endgame was a masterpiece of technique. Both players maneuvered their remaining pieces with surgical precision. James pressed for a win, but Maya defended flawlessly. With less than a minute on each clock, they reached a position where neither could make progress. James extended his hand. "Draw," he said, and there was deep respect in his voice. "You play like someone twice your age with 10 times your experience. How is this possible?" "My grandmother started teaching me when I was 4, Maya explained. "We played every day in the shelter. When she got sick, we played in the hospital. Even when she could barely move, she'd tell me what moves to make for her. She said chess was the only inheritance she could give me that no one could take away." James stood up and turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight is extraordinary. This young woman has just drawn against a Grandmaster in a rapid game. Not through luck, not through tricks, but through pure chess ability. She's not just talented, she's phenomenal." "But she's homeless," Charles said, as if this fact negated everything they'd just seen. James Chen's expression hardened. "So was I once. My family fled Vietnam with nothing. We lived in a refugee camp for 2 years. I learned chess from a Red Cross worker who saw something in me. That man changed my life." He looked directly at Richard Whitmore. "The question is, what are you going to do with the gift that's walked through your door?" The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Maya stood quietly in the center of it all, a small figure in dirty clothes who had just proven that genius could come from anywhere. She thought of Grandma Rose, who never got the chance to show the world what she could do. But maybe, just maybe, Maya would get that chance. "Well," Richard said finally, his voice carrying the authority of his position, "we did promise her a week's accommodation. We'll honor that, of course." "A week?" James Chen shook his head. "Mr. Whitmore, you have a potential world champion standing in your club and you're talking about a week? What would you have us do?" Margaret demanded. "Adopt her? We're a chess club, not a charity." "No," James said firmly. "You're a chess club that's just discovered one of the most talented young players in the country. If you can't see the opportunity in that, then you're not the chess lovers you claim to be." As the members argued around her, Maya felt exhaustion settling into her bones. The adrenaline that had carried her through 3 games was fading, leaving her aware of how tired, how cold, how overwhelmingly alone she still was. She'd won their food and shelter, but she hadn't won their respect. Not really. To most of them, she was still just a problem to be solved, a curiosity to be examined. But as she looked at the chessboard, at the pieces standing in their final positions from her game with the Grandmaster, she felt Grandma Rose's presence. "You showed them, baby girl," she could almost hear her grandmother saying. "You showed them that we belong wherever we choose to stand." James Chen hadn't moved from his position near the chessboard. His dark eyes remained fixed on Maya, but his mind was clearly elsewhere, calculating something far beyond the chess moves they'd just played. The room buzzed with heated discussions, but he raised his hand for silence. "Miss Thompson," he said formally, "would you solve a puzzle for me?" Without waiting for an answer, he began setting up a complex position on the board. White to move and mate in 7. Several members leaned in to study the position. It was incredibly complex, with pieces scattered across the board in what seemed like chaos. Harrison Vale pulled out his phone, discreetly trying to analyze it with a chess engine. Maya studied the position for less than 20 seconds. Queen to h6, forcing the king to f8, then rook to d8 check, king to g7, queen to h8 check, king to f6, queen to h4 check, king to e5, and queen to d4 mate. She hadn't touched the pieces, hadn't needed to. She'd solved it entirely in her mind. James Chen's composure finally cracked. He turned to face the assembled members, his voice carrying an urgency that made everyone stop talking. "Do you understand what you're seeing? This puzzle was composed by Alexei Troitsky in 1895. It's considered one of the most difficult tactical puzzles ever created. International masters struggle with it. She solved it in 20 seconds, in her head." "That's impossible," Charles Hoffman protested. "She must have seen it before." "Where?" James demanded. "In what chessbook did a homeless 12-year-old study obscure 19th century Russian compositions? Please, Mr. Hoffman, enlighten us." Richard Whitmore moved closer to Maya, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "How many moves ahead can you calculate, child?" "It depends on the position," Maya answered honestly. "In tactical positions, maybe 15 to 20 moves. In quiet positions, less. But I can feel the right plan." "You feel the right plan," Harrison repeated softly. "That's what separates great players from good ones. It can't be taught." Eleanor Whitmore, who had been quiet for some time, suddenly spoke up. "Richard, we need to call an emergency board meeting. Tonight." "Eleanor, it's past 9 o'clock. "Tonight," she insisted, with a firmness that surprised everyone, including her husband. "This child has been sleeping on the streets while possessing one of the most extraordinary minds I've ever encountered. If we send her back out there tonight, we're no better than the people who denied her grandmother the chance to compete 50 years ago." "This is getting out of hand," Margaret protested. "We're talking about taking responsibility for a child we know nothing about. There are legal implications, financial considerations. I know about those things. Maya said quietly, but her voice carried. I know you're worried I'll be a burden, that I'll cost you money, that I'll embarrass you. She looked at each of them in turn. I've heard those words my whole life. From social workers, from foster parents, from people on the street who step over me like I'm garbage. She moved to the chessboard and picked up a black pawn. My grandmother told me that in chess a pawn is worth 1 point, a knight or bishop 3, a rook 5, a queen 9, but a pawn that reaches the 8th rank becomes a queen, from 1 point to 9. That's not just promotion, that's transformation. She set the pawn down on the 8th rank. I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm just asking for the chance to reach the 8th rank. The room was silent. Even Charles Hoffman seemed affected by her words. James Chen pulled out his phone. I'm calling the United States Chess Federation. They need to know about her immediately. He looked at Richard. And if your club won't sponsor her, I'll find one that will. Now wait a minute, Richard said, his pride stung. The Grandview Club has been the premier chess institution in this city for 70 years. We don't need outsiders telling us how to handle our affairs. Then handle them, James shot back. You have a potential world champion standing in front of you, wearing clothes that haven't been washed in weeks, with nowhere to sleep tonight. Except whatever doorway she can find. What does that say about your prestigious institution? Victoria Pemberton, who had been texting furiously on her phone, looked up. I've just Googled Rose Thompson. There are articles from 1962. She really did exist. There's even a photo. She turned her phone to show a black and white image of a young black woman seated at a chessboard, her face bearing a striking resemblance to Maya. The article says she defeated 3 masters in unofficial games but was denied entry to the state championship because of her race. My God, Eleanor breathed. We're witnessing history repeat itself. No, Harrison Vale said firmly. We're not. Because we're going to do better. We have to do better. He looked at his fellow members. I'll personally cover her expenses for the first month. Training, accommodation, whatever she needs. Harrison, Margaret said, shocked, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, he replied. I've played chess for 40 years. I've won titles, trophies, prize money. But I've never seen anything like what I saw tonight. If we let her walk out of here, if we fail her like this country failed her grandmother, then we don't deserve to call ourselves chess players. Theodore Banks, who had returned quietly during James Chen's arrival, stepped forward. His face was still flushed from his earlier humiliation, but his voice was steady. The girl beat me fairly. More than fairly. She demolished me while I was insulting her. I'm ashamed of how I behaved. He looked at Maya. I own several rental properties. I have a furnished apartment vacant right now. She can stay there. The offer stunned everyone, no one more than Maya herself. Ted, Richard said carefully, are you sure? The legal ramifications. I'll handle the legal aspects, Charles Hoffman said, surprising everyone again. I may have been hasty in my judgments. If the child is indeed what she appears to be, then she deserves proper representation. Pro bono, of course. One by one, the members began stepping forward. Victoria offered to buy her a complete wardrobe. Margaret, not to be outdone, offered to cover her food expenses. Others volunteered tutoring, chess books, tournament entry fees. Maya stood in the center of this sudden outpouring, tears finally breaking through her careful composure. These people who had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her as less than human. They were transforming before her eyes, just as a pawn transforms when it reaches the 8th rank. There's one condition, Richard Whitmore said, his authoritative voice cutting through the emotional moment. Everyone turned to look at him. She must maintain her studies. Chess is wonderful, but education is essential. She'll need tutoring to catch up on what she's missed. I can read at a college level, Maya said quickly. I taught myself in the libraries. Math, too. It's like chess, patterns, and logic. Of course you can, James Chen said with a slight smile. The same mind that can calculate 20 moves ahead can certainly handle academics. He addressed the room. I'll be in town for another week. I'll work with her every day, assess her true potential, and create a training program. Eleanor Whitmore moved to Maya, and after a moment's hesitation, put her arm around the girl's thin shoulders. Maya tensed at first. She wasn't used to being touched with kindness, but then slowly relaxed. You must be exhausted, Eleanor said gently. Would you like to come to our home tonight? We have a guest room, and you can take a proper bath, have a good night's sleep. Maya looked up at her, searching her face for any sign of insincerity or hidden agenda. Finding none, she nodded slowly. But first, Richard said, his tone formal again, we need to document everything. Charles, draw up the necessary papers. Harrison, contact the Chess Federation. Ted, make sure that apartment is ready by tomorrow, and someone should probably inform social services that we've found one of their missing children. No, Maya said sharply, fear creeping into her voice for the first time all evening. Please, no social services. They'll put me back in the system, back in foster care. I can't go back there. Charles Hoffman adjusted his glasses. If we do this properly, with proper guardianship papers and the backing of the Chess Federation, social services will likely be glad to have one less case to worry about. But Maya, he said, using her name for the first time, you'll need to trust us. Can you do that? Maya thought of all the times trust had been betrayed, all the promises that had been broken. But she also thought of Grandma Rose, who had trusted that someday someone would see Maya's gift and give her a chance. I'll try, she said simply. As the members dispersed to handle their various tasks, James Chen sat down at the chessboard one more time, gesturing for Maya to join him. Show me your favorite game, he said. Not a game you've played, but one from the masters that speaks to you. Without hesitation, Maya began setting up the pieces. Morphy versus the Duke of Brunswick, 1858, she said. It's called the opera game. Why that one? James asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Because Morphy was an outsider too, Maya said, moving the pieces through the famous game with practiced ease. An American in Europe, young, dismissed by the establishment. But he played with such beauty, such pure understanding, that they had to acknowledge his genius. And now you're following in his footsteps, James said softly. No, Maya corrected him, her young voice carrying the weight of generations. I'm following in my grandmother's footsteps. She just never got to finish the journey. The next morning arrived with a kind of crystalline clarity that only winter can bring. Maya woke in a bed for the first time in months, a real bed with clean sheets that smelled like lavender and a down comforter that felt like sleeping in a cloud. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, that she'd wake up in a doorway somewhere, frozen and hungry. But the soft morning light filtering through curtains told her this was real. Eleanor Whitmore knocked gently on the door. Maya? Breakfast is ready when you are. Maya sat up, still wearing the soft pajamas Eleanor had given her the night before. They were probably expensive, but to Maya their true value was in their clean warmth. She padded downstairs to find Richard already at the breakfast table, reading the Wall Street Journal, while Eleanor set out plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh fruit. Good morning, Richard said formally, though his tone was warmer than it had been the previous evening. I trust you slept well? Yes, sir, thank you. We have a busy day ahead, he continued, folding his newspaper. Charles Hoffman will be here at 9 with the guardianship papers. James Chen wants to work with you from 10 to noon. This afternoon Victoria insists on taking you shopping, though I've warned her to be practical. Maya ate slowly, savoring every bite, still not entirely convinced this wasn't all going to disappear. Eleanor watched her with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Maya, Eleanor said gently, last night you mentioned foster homes. Would you be comfortable telling us about your experiences? It would help Charles with the legal matters. Maya set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. There were 3 homes after Grandma died. The first family just wanted the check they got for keeping me. They had 4 other foster kids, and we all slept in the basement. I ran away after 2 months. Richard and Eleanor exchanged glances but didn't interrupt. The second home was better at first. They seemed nice. But the father... Maya paused, her hands clenching slightly. He would come to my room at night. He never did anything, just stood in the doorway watching me. I started sleeping in the closet with a chair against the door. When I told the social worker, she said I was being dramatic. I ran away from there too. Eleanor's face had gone pale. Richard's jaw was clenched tight. The third home treated me like a servant. I had to clean, cook, take care of their younger children. When I tried to do homework, they said I was being lazy. When I asked to join the school chess club, they laughed and said I should focus on skills that would actually help me in life, like scrubbing floors. Maya's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. So I ran away again. I figured the streets couldn't be worse than what the system offered. My God, Richard said quietly. How long have you been on your own? 8 months, Maya replied. Since April. Spring and summer weren't too bad. I could sleep in parks, wash in public fountains, but when winter came... She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. The doorbell rang, breaking the heavy moment. Charles Hoffman entered, carrying a briefcase and wearing a different expression than he'd had the night before, professional but compassionate. Good morning, everyone. Maya. I've spent most of the night researching your case and making calls. The good news is that you're not technically a runaway, since no missing person report was ever properly filed. The system lost track of you, which works in our favor. He sat down and pulled out various documents. I've drawn up papers for temporary guardianship under the auspices of the Grandview Chess Club, with Richard and Eleanor as primary guardians and myself as legal advocate. Harrison Vale and Theodore Banks have agreed to be co-sponsors. This arrangement will give us 6 months to establish a more permanent solution while keeping social services satisfied that you're in a stable environment. And they'll accept this? Eleanor asked anxiously. With James Chen's endorsement and the Chess Federation's backing, yes. I've already spoken with a judge who's willing to expedite the process. It helps that Maya has demonstrated exceptional ability. The state has provisions for supporting gifted children. Maya listened to them discussing her future, feeling oddly detached. She'd learned not to hope too much, not to trust too quickly. But something about the determination in their voices was different from what she'd experienced before. James Chen arrived precisely at 10, carrying a laptop and several chess books. Good morning, Maya. Ready to work? For the next 2 hours, Maya's world narrowed to 64 squares. James tested her in ways no one ever had, not just her tactical ability, but her understanding of pawn structures, her endgame technique, her opening repertoire. He showed her games from world champions, and she absorbed them like a sponge absorbs water. Your tactical vision is already at master level, James told her, his excitement barely contained. But your positional understanding needs work. You play like someone who learned in isolation, without regular competition against varied styles. I played against myself mostly, Maya admitted, and against the computer at the library when I could. That explains it. You need to play against humans, many different humans. I'm going to recommend you for the National Youth Championship next month. With intensive training, you could place in the top 3. Next month? Richard, who had been observing, interjected. Isn't that too soon? No, James said firmly. She needs to establish her rating, get noticed by the right people. The chess world needs to know who Maya Thompson is. That afternoon, Victoria Pemberton arrived in a gleaming Mercedes. She looked at Maya with an expression that was trying to be kind, but couldn't quite hide a lingering discomfort. Well, she said briskly, let's get you properly dressed. Can't have you representing the club looking like, well, looking inappropriate. The shopping trip was overwhelming. Victoria swept through stores like a general conducting a campaign, selecting clothes with military precision. Jeans, sweaters, dresses, shoes, a winter coat that cost more than Maya had seen in her entire life. At each store, sales associates who initially looked askance at Maya changed their tune when they saw Victoria's credit card. "You'll need formal wear for tournaments," Victoria explained, holding up a navy blue dress. "Appearance matters in these settings, whether we like it or not." Maya stood in front of a three-way mirror, barely recognizing herself in the new clothes. The girl looking back at her appeared respectable, even elegant, but inside, she still felt like the same scared, hungry child who had walked into the club just 24 hours ago. "Thank you," she said quietly to Victoria. "I know you don't really like me, but thank you anyway." Victoria paused in her shopping, looking genuinely surprised. It's not that I don't like you, child. I just don't understand you. My world and yours, they're so different. But what you did last night, the way you played, it was beautiful. Even I could see that." That evening, the club held an emergency meeting. Maya wasn't allowed to attend, but Eleanor gave her a full report afterward. The vote to sponsor her had been contentious, but ultimately passed, 28 to 12. Even some of those who voted against it admitted they were impressed by her talent. They were simply worried about the precedent it might set. Over the next week, Maya's life transformed with dizzying speed. She moved into Ted Banks' furnished apartment, a clean, safe space that felt impossibly luxurious. James Chen worked with her every morning, pushing her harder than anyone ever had. Afternoons were spent with a tutor, catching up on her formal education. Evenings, she played at the club, facing different members, learning their styles, adapting and growing. Harrison Vale became an unexpected mentor, spending hours analyzing games with her. "You have the gift," he told her one evening. "But gifts without discipline are just wasted potential. Your grandmother gave you the foundation. Now we're going to build a mansion on it." The story of the homeless chess prodigy began to spread through the chess community. A reporter from Chess Life magazine came to interview her. The local news did a segment. Suddenly, Maya Thompson was becoming a name people knew. But late at night, alone in her apartment, Maya would sometimes wake in panic, certain it was all going to disappear. She'd get up and check that her new chess set was still there, that the clothes were still in the closet, that the refrigerator still had food. Old habits died hard. One night, she found an old photo in one of the chess books James had given her. It was from a 1962 tournament, and in the background, almost out of focus, was a young black woman watching the games from behind a rope barrier. Maya recognized her immediately, Grandma Rose, young and vibrant, but kept on the outside looking in. Maya touched the photo gently. "I made it inside, Grandma," she whispered, "just like you always said I would." The National Youth Championship was now 3 weeks away. Maya's rating had been provisionally established at 2,200, expert level, based on her games at the club, but everyone knew she was stronger than that. The question was, how much stronger? Charles Hoffman had successfully navigated the legal system. Maya was now officially under the club's guardianship, with a trust fund established for her education and chess development. Several members had contributed generously, some out of genuine support, others perhaps from guilt over their initial treatment of her. Margaret Sinclair remained somewhat distant, but had surprised everyone by donating a substantial sum to the trust. When Maya thanked her, Margaret had said stiffly, "I may have been wrong about you, child. I don't like being wrong, but I dislike being unjust even more." Ted Banks visited regularly, bringing groceries and checking on the apartment. He never mentioned their first game, but Maya could see he was trying to atone for his behavior. During one visit he said quietly, "I have a daughter your age. Lives with her mother in California. When I saw you that night, so hungry and brave, I thought, what if that was her? What if she needed help and people like me just laughed at her?" The transformation wasn't just in Maya's life. The club itself was changing. James Chen's presence and his endorsement of Maya had attracted attention from the wider chess community. Younger players began applying for membership. The stuffy, exclusive atmosphere was slowly giving way to something more dynamic, but not everyone was happy with the changes. A small faction, led by a member named Gerald Patterson, whom Maya hadn't met that first night, complained that the club was losing its character, becoming too diverse. Richard Whitmore shut down such talk firmly, declaring that the club's character was chess excellence, nothing more, nothing less. 3 weeks flew by in a blur of chess positions, opening preparation, and endgame studies. Maya's strength grew daily. She was now consistently beating players rated 2,300 and higher. James Chen extended his stay to continue working with her, saying he hadn't seen such rapid improvement since he'd trained the current women's world champion. The night before leaving for the National Youth Championship, Maya sat in the club playing casual blitz games with members. The atmosphere was completely different from that first night. People called out encouragement, analyzed positions with her, treated her as one of their own. Eleanor Whitmore sat beside her during a break. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "A little," Maya admitted. "I've never played in a real tournament before." "You'll do wonderfully," Eleanor assured her. "But remember, no matter what happens, you've already won the most important game." "Which game is that?" Eleanor smiled. "The game against despair. The game where you refuse to let circumstances define your worth. That's the game your grandmother won too, even if the world didn't recognize it." The community room at the Grandview Chess Club had never hosted an emergency meeting quite like this one. It was 3 days after Maya had departed for the National Youth Championship, and Richard Whitmore had called all members to attend. The atmosphere was charged with an energy that was part excitement, part shame, and part determination. Richard stood at the podium, his usual commanding presence somehow more human, more vulnerable. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been president of this club for 15 years. In that time, I believed we represented the finest traditions of chess in this city. But recent events have shown me that we had become something else entirely. A fortress of privilege that had forgotten the true spirit of the game." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward with interest. 3 days ago, Richard continued, a 12-year-old girl we initially tried to throw out onto the street won her first 3 games at the National Youth Championship. She's currently tied for first place with a young man who's been training since he was 4, who has 2 coaches and parents who've spent $50,000 on his chess education. He paused, letting that sink in. Maya Thompson has had exactly 3 weeks of formal training. 3 weeks. And she's competing with children who've had every advantage life can offer. Harrison Vale stood up. "Richard's right, but this isn't just about Maya. It's about what we want this club to be. I've been thinking about this constantly since that night. How many other Mayas are out there? How many brilliant minds are we ignoring because they don't come in the right package?" Margaret Sinclair, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, raised her hand. "I have a confession to make. I've been researching Rose Thompson, Maya's grandmother. I found more than just articles. I found game scores, recorded by spectators at those unofficial matches. She wasn't just good, she was extraordinary. One master said she played the most beautiful chess he'd ever seen." She pulled out a folder and extracted an old, yellowed score sheet. "This is her game against Master Harold Brenner from 1961. She sacrificed 3 pieces in a king hunt that Mikhail Tal himself would have been proud of. Brenner later said it was the most humiliating and instructive loss of his career. And we, society, told her she couldn't compete because of her skin color," Charles Hoffman added, his voice heavy with disgust. "We robbed the chess world of witnessing her brilliance, and we almost did the same thing to her granddaughter." Theodore Banks stood up, his bulk making the movement noticeable. "I propose we create a scholarship program, the Rose Thompson Memorial Scholarship. We find kids like Maya, talented but disadvantaged, and we give them the chance Rose never had. How would we fund such a program? Someone asked from the back. I'll start it with $50,000, Ted said simply. It won't bring back the moments I missed with my own daughter, won't erase the cruel words I said to Maya, but it's a start. I'll match that, Harrison said immediately. As will I, Richard added. Eleanor and I have already discussed it. One by one, members began pledging support. Even those who had been most resistant to Maya's presence seemed caught up in the moment. Victoria Pemberton, who had initially been one of Maya's harshest critics, stood up. I serve on the boards of 3 private schools, she said. I can ensure that scholarship recipients get quality education alongside their chess training. And, she paused, seeming to struggle with her words, I owe Maya an apology, a real one, not just financial support. The things I said that night about disease and cleanliness, they came from fear and ignorance. I'm ashamed. Gerald Patterson, the member who had been most vocal about the club losing its character, raised his hand. I still have concerns about changing too quickly. Gerald, Richard cut him off sharply, the only thing we're changing is our willingness to recognize talent regardless of its origin. If that threatens you, perhaps you should reconsider your membership. The room went silent. Richard Whitmore had never been so direct, so forceful about an issue of inclusion. Eleanor Whitmore stood beside her husband. I've been thinking about what Maya said, about being a pawn trying to reach the 8th rank. But she was wrong about one thing. She was never a pawn. She was always a queen. We just couldn't see it because of our prejudices. James Chen, who had been invited to join via video call from the championship venue, appeared on the large screen at the front of the room. I want to update you all on Maya's progress. She's just finished her 4th game. She won in 23 moves against the 3rd seed. The way she's playing, it's not just technical skill. She has something special, something that can't be taught. She sees the board like an artist sees a canvas. How is she handling the pressure? Eleanor asked anxiously. Like she's been doing this all her life, James replied. Between games, while other kids are stressed or studying with their coaches, she sits quietly and thinks about her grandmother. She told me she plays each game as a tribute to Rose. Charles Hoffman had been taking notes throughout the meeting. If we're serious about this scholarship program, we need to do it right. Not just money, but mentorship, tutoring, proper support systems. We need to partner with schools, with child welfare organizations, with other chess clubs. I can help with that, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Father Michael from the local shelter where Maya had sometimes stayed. I heard about what you're doing. We see kids with potential all the time, but no resources to develop it. This program could change lives. Richard nodded. Then it's settled. The Rose Thompson Memorial Scholarship will be officially established. We'll start with chess, but who knows? Maybe we'll find other talents too, mathematics, music, art. Brilliance doesn't discriminate. Only people do. Ted Banks pulled out his phone and showed the room a photo he'd taken of Maya's new apartment after he'd helped her settle in. You should have seen her face when she realized she had her own space, her own bed, her own chess set. She actually asked me if it was okay to use the hot water for a bath. Imagine being 12 and not knowing if you're allowed hot water. The room fell silent again, the weight of Maya's past suffering settling over them like a shroud. We can't change what she's been through, Margaret said quietly, but we can ensure no other child in our community goes through the same. I propose we also establish an emergency fund for immediate needs, food, shelter, clothing, for any child who comes to us for help, regardless of their chess ability. Seconded, several voices called out. As the meeting progressed, something remarkable happened. The Grandview Chess Club, which had been a bastion of exclusivity for 70 years, began transforming into something else entirely. A beacon of opportunity. Members who had barely spoken to each other except to discuss chess began sharing ideas about community outreach, about using their considerable resources and connections to make real change. James Chen's image flickered on the screen again. Maya's about to start her 5th game. It's against the top seed, Alexander Petrov. He's been called the next American chess prodigy. His rating is 2,450. That's master level, someone gasped. Maya's provisional rating is only 2,200. Ratings don't tell the whole story, James said with a slight smile. Maya has something ratings can't measure, the heart of a champion and the legacy of generations. I'm going to go watch her game now. I'll update you afterward. As James signed off, Richard looked around the room at his fellow members. While Maya is fighting her battles on the board, we have our own battle here. Against our own prejudices, against systemic inequalities, against the comfortable blindness that wealth can bring. Are we ready for that fight? The response was unanimous. Even Gerald Patterson, after a long moment of internal struggle, raised his hand in agreement. Eleanor pulled out a photograph she'd taken of Maya at the club the night before she left for the championship. In it, Maya was bent over a chessboard, completely absorbed, her face illuminated by the warm light of the club's chandeliers. But what struck everyone was the expression on her face, not concentration, but joy, pure, unbridled joy at being able to play the game she loved in a place where she was finally welcome. This, Eleanor said, holding up the photo, this is what we're fighting for. Not just for Maya, but for every child who has a gift but no opportunity to share it. Charles Hoffman stood up, his legal mind already working. I'll have the scholarship paperwork drawn up by tomorrow. We'll need a board of trustees, selection criteria, oversight procedures. Charles, Richard interrupted with a slight smile. Let's not overcomplicate this. The main criterion should be simple. Does this child have potential that would otherwise go unrealized? Maya didn't need paperwork that night. She just needed someone to say yes. As the meeting began to wind down, members broke into smaller groups, excitedly discussing the possibilities. The scholarship program was just the beginning. Ideas flew about after-school programs, summer chess camps for underprivileged youth, partnerships with public schools. Victoria Pemberton approached Margaret Sinclair. I've been thinking about what you said, about Rose Thompson's games. What if we created an exhibition? The Lost Games of Rose Thompson. We could invite the public, raise awareness. And funds for the scholarship, Margaret finished, her eyes lighting up. Yes, that's brilliant. We could even see if any of the masters she played are still alive, get their testimonies. Meanwhile, Ted Banks was on his phone with his accountant, setting up the financial structure for the scholarship fund. Harrison Vale was already reaching out to his contacts in the chess world, spreading the word about what the Grandview Club was doing. Father Michael stood with Richard and Eleanor. You know, he said thoughtfully, Maya's not the only one who's been transformed by this. I've watched your club from afar for years, always saw it as a symbol of the divide in our city. But now you're becoming a bridge. A bridge built by a 12-year-old girl, Eleanor said with wonder. She didn't just beat us at chess. She beat us at humanity, showed us what we were supposed to be all along. Richard's phone buzzed. It was a text from James Chen. Game over. Maya won. Brilliant queen sacrifice on move 31. The hall gave her a standing ovation. The top seed cried. Not from losing, but from witnessing something beautiful. Richard read the message aloud, and the room erupted in cheers. Their Maya, the girl they'd almost thrown out, the child they'd mocked and dismissed, was proving that talent could bloom anywhere, even in the harshest concrete, even in the coldest winter. To Maya Thompson, Richard raised his coffee cup in a toast, and to her grandmother Rose. May their legacy transform not just our club, but our hearts. 6 months had passed since that cold December night when Maya Thompson first walked into the Grandview Chess Club. Now, on a warm June evening, the club's main hall was transformed for its 70th anniversary gala. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers, and the room buzzed with conversation from over 200 guests, members, dignitaries, chess masters, and most notably, 15 children wearing matching navy blazers with the Rose Thompson Memorial Scholarship emblem embroidered on the pocket. Maya stood at the side of the room, almost unrecognizable from the hungry, desperate child who had begged to play for food. Her hair was neatly styled, her dress elegant but age-appropriate, and most remarkably she carried herself with quiet confidence. The National Youth Championship trophy gleamed on a nearby table. She had won all 9 of her games, a perfect score that hadn't been achieved in the tournament's 40-year history. Nervous? Harrison Vale asked, approaching with 2 glasses of sparkling apple cider. A little, Maya admitted, accepting the glass gratefully. Playing chess is easier than giving speeches. You'll do fine. Just speak from the heart, like you always do. Across the room, Richard Whitmore was deep in conversation with several major donors, explaining the scholarship program's expansion. In just 6 months, they had raised over $1 million, identified 15 talented children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and partnered with 3 schools and 5 community centers. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor Whitmore's voice rang out as she tapped a spoon against her glass. If I could have your attention, please. We have a very special program tonight. The crowd quieted and gathered around the small stage that had been set up for the occasion. Richard took the microphone first. 70 years ago, this club was founded on the principle that chess was the great equalizer, a game where anyone could excel regardless of their background. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that principle. We became exclusive rather than inclusive, proud rather than welcoming. It took a 12-year-old girl to remind us of who we were supposed to be. He paused, his eyes finding Maya in the crowd. 6 months ago, Maya Thompson walked through our doors seeking nothing more than a meal in exchange for a chess game. What she gave us instead was a mirror to see our own failures and an opportunity for redemption. Margaret Sinclair took the microphone next. I was one of the people who wanted to throw Maya out that night. I said terrible things, thought terrible thoughts. I stand here today not just as a board member of this club, but as someone who has been profoundly changed. Maya didn't just teach us about chess. She taught us about courage, dignity, and the power of perseverance. One by one, other members spoke. Ted Banks talked about the apartment that had become Maya's home and the 3 other scholarship recipients now living in his properties. Charles Hoffman discussed the legal framework they'd established to protect and support gifted children. Victoria Pemberton announced that all 3 private schools she was associated with had agreed to reserve spots for scholarship recipients. Then James Chen appeared on the large screen via video link from a tournament in Moscow. Maya Thompson is not just a chess prodigy, he said. She's become a symbol of what's possible when talent meets opportunity. Her rating has risen to 2,480 in just 6 months. She's already a woman international master and will likely become the youngest American woman Grandmaster within the year. But more than that, she's inspired a movement. Chess clubs across the country are creating their own scholarship programs, all because of what started here. Finally, it was Maya's turn. She walked to the microphone, her steps steady despite her nerves. The room fell completely silent. 6 months ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, I stood in this room as nobody. I was invisible, the kind of person you step over on the street without seeing. I came here because I was hungry, but also because I was desperate to play the game my grandmother taught me, the game that kept me sane during the hardest nights. She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd, some who had mocked her, others who had saved her, all now watching with respect and attention. My grandmother, Rose Thompson, never got to stand on a stage like this. The world told her that her skin color, her poverty, her gender made her unworthy of competing. She died believing her chess would die with her. But she was wrong. Her chess lived on in me, and now it lives on in all of these children. Maya gestured to the scholarship recipients, who beamed with pride. People ask me if I forgive those who were cruel to me that first night. The truth is, I don't think about forgiveness. I think about transformation. Every person in this room who initially rejected me has become a champion for children like me. That's not something that needs forgiveness. It's something that deserves celebration. The room stirred with emotion. Several people wiped their eyes discreetly. But I want to be clear about something, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. This isn't a fairy tale where the poor girl gets rescued by rich benefactors. This is a story about chess, about how a game with fixed rules and equal pieces can reveal the best and worst in us. Every child who walks through these doors with talent should be met with opportunity, not obstacles. She looked directly at the scholarship recipients. To my fellow scholars, remember this. We're not charity cases. We're not here to make anyone feel good about themselves. We're here because we have gifts that deserve to be nurtured. Play with pride, learn with hunger, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. Maya then turned to a special guest in the front row, an elderly black woman in a wheelchair, whom Eleanor had spent months tracking down. I want to introduce someone very special. This is Mrs. Dorothy Brenner, the widow of Master Harold Brenner. She has something she'd like to share. Mrs. Brenner was helped to the microphone, her voice quavering but determined. My late husband played against Rose Thompson in 1961. That game haunted him for the rest of his life, not because he lost, but because he realized he had witnessed genius that the world would never recognize. Before he died, he made me promise that if I ever found Rose's family, I would give them this. She pulled out an old chess set, the pieces worn smooth with use. This was Harold's most prized possession, the set he used when he won his master title. He wanted Rose's descendant to have it, to carry on the legacy that should never have been interrupted. Maya accepted the chess set with trembling hands, tears flowing freely down her face. The room erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. As the formal program ended and the gala continued, Maya found herself surrounded by the scholarship recipients, children from backgrounds as diverse as the city itself, all united by their love of chess and their newfound opportunity. "Is it true you lived on the streets?" asked Samuel, a 10-year-old who had been discovered playing chess with bottle caps in a homeless shelter. "Yes," Maya said simply, "but that's not what defines me. What defines us is what we do with the chances we're given." "Will you teach us?" asked Maria, a shy girl whose immigrant parents worked 3 jobs between them. "We'll teach each other," Maya replied. "That's what a community does." Later, as the evening wound down, Maya stood with Richard and Eleanor on the club's balcony, looking out over the city lights. The same streets that had been her harsh home 6 months ago now sparkled with possibility. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come here that night?" Eleanor asked softly. Maya considered the question. "I try not to think about what-ifs. Grandma Rose taught me that in chess and in life you can only move forward, never backward." "Speaking of moving forward," Richard said with a slight smile, "James Chen has arranged for you to train with the national team this summer. You'll be the youngest player ever invited to their program." Maya's eyes widened. "Really? Really? But that's tomorrow's challenge. Tonight is for celebration." As if on cue, Harrison Vale appeared with a cake decorated like a chessboard, Maya's name written in chocolate pieces across the squares. The scholarship children gathered around, their faces bright with joy and sugar-fueled excitement. Theodore Banks raised his glass for a toast. "6 months ago, I played a chess game that changed my life. Not because I lost, though that was humbling, but because it showed me who I really was. Maya, you didn't just beat me at chess. You beat me at life, showed me what actually matters." "To Maya," someone called out. "To Rose Thompson," another voice added. "To transformation," Maya said quietly, but her voice carried. As the glasses clinked and the celebration continued, Maya noticed a figure standing by the entrance. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, clearly homeless, peering in with the same desperate hope she'd had 6 months ago. Without hesitation, Maya walked over to him. "Do you play chess?" she asked gently. The boy nodded shyly. "Would you like to come in? We're having a party and there's plenty of food." Richard Whitmore appeared beside her, understanding immediately. "Of course. Welcome to the Grandview Chess Club, young man. Everyone is welcome here." As Maya led the boy inside, she thought she felt Grandma Rose's presence, warm and approving. The cycle continued, but this time the door would stay open. This time, no child with a gift would be turned away. The Grandview Chess Club's 70th anniversary gala would be remembered not for its elegance or its distinguished guests, but for the moment when a formerly homeless chess prodigy opened the door for another child in need, ensuring that the transformation that began on a cold December night would continue for generations to come. In her speech, Maya had said she didn't believe in fairy tales. But standing there, surrounded by people who had gone from tormentors to champions, watching scholarship children learn chess from masters who once would have ignored them, she realized that sometimes life could be more magical than any story. The girl who had played for food had become a player who ensured others would never have to make that bargain. The pawn had indeed reached the 8th rank, but instead of simply becoming a queen, she had transformed the entire board. As the evening ended and the guests began to leave, Maya stood once more at the chessboard where it all began. She set up the pieces with the set Mrs. Brenner had given her, running her fingers over the smooth, worn wood. Each piece carried the weight of history, her grandmother's denied dreams, Master Brenner's regret, her own journey from the streets to this moment. "Thank you, Grandma Rose," she whispered to the empty room. "We did it. We finally made it home." Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, unaware that in one small corner a revolution had taken place. Not a revolution of violence or anger, but of compassion and recognition. The Grandview Chess Club had become what it always claimed to be, a place where chess was truly the great equalizer, where brilliance was recognized regardless of its origin, where every child who could see 64 squares of possibility would be given the chance to play. Maya Thompson, once homeless and hungry, now stood as living proof that talent could bloom anywhere, even in the harshest soil. And in the warmth of the club that had become her home, surrounded by the community that had become her family, she prepared for her next game, knowing that win or lose, she had already achieved the greatest victory of all. She had transformed a pawn push into a movement, a chess game into a chance at life, and a moment of desperate courage into a legacy that would endure for generations. Dear friend, Maya's story reminds us that brilliance knows no boundaries. Not poverty, not race, not circumstance. Every day, countless gifted children sleep in shelters and doorways, their potential invisible to a world that judges by appearances rather than ability. But when we open our doors and our minds, when we look beyond our comfort zones to see the humanity in everyone, we don't just change individual lives, we transform entire communities. The next time you pass someone in need, remember, you might be walking past the next chess champion, the next pioneering scientist, or the next great artist. All they need is one person to say yes to their potential. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to help us share more stories that matter.